a new society being built. We have already mentioned that the Messenger of Allah arrived in Medina on Friday, 12th Rabi al-Awwal, A1AH, September 27th, 622 AD, and took the downstairs of Abi Ayyub's house as a temporary residence. The first task to which the Prophet attended on his arrival in Medina was the construction of a mosque in the very site where his camel knelt down. The land which belonged to the orphans was purchased. The Prophet himself contributed to building the mosque by carrying adobe, bricks and stones while reciting verses. O Allah, no bliss is there but that of the hereafter. I beseech you to forgive the immigrants and helpers. The ground was cleared of weeds and shrubs, palm trees and rubbish. The graves of the polytheists dug up and then levelled, and the trees planted around. The Qibla, the direction in which the Muslims turned their faces in prayer, was constructed to face Jerusalem. Two beams were also erected to hold the ceiling up. It was square in form, each side measuring approximately 100 yards, facing towards the north and having 3 gates on each of the remaining sides. Nearby rooms reserved for the Prophet's household were built of stones and adobe bricks, with ceilings of palm leaves. To the north of the mosque, a place was reserved for the Muslims who had neither family nor home. The adhan summoning the Muslims to the mosque by the call for prayer was initiated at this early stage of post-migration era. The mosque was not merely a locus to perform prayers, but rather an Islamic league where the Muslims were instructed in Islam and its doctrines. It served as an assembly place where the conflicting pre-Islamic trends used to come to terms. It was the headquarters wherein all the affairs of the Muslims were administered and consultative and executive councils held. The mosque being the Prophet next turned his attention to cementing the ties of mutual brotherhood amongst the Muslims of Medina, Al-Ansar, the helpers, and Al-Muhajirun, the immigrants. It was indeed unique in the history of the world. A gathering of 90 men, half of them immigrants and the others helpers, assembled in the house of Anas bin Malik, where the Prophet gave the spirit of brotherhood his official blessing. When either of the two persons who had been paired as brothers passed away, his property was inherited by his brother in faith. This practice continued till the following verse was revealed at the time of the Battle of Badr, and the regular rule of inheritance was allowed to take its usual course. But kindred by blood are nearer to one another regarding inheritance. Brotherhood in faith, to quote Muhammad al-Ghazali, again was holding subordinate every distinction of race and kindred, and supporting the Islamic precept. None is superior to the other except on the basis of piety, of God-fearing. The Prophet attached to that brotherhood a valid contract. It was not just meaningless words, but rather a valid practice relating to blood and wealth, rather than a passing whim taking the form of accidental greeting. The atmosphere of brotherhood and fellow feeling created a spirit of selflessness, infused deeply in the hearts of his followers, and produced very healthy results. For example, Sa'ad bin Rabi, a helper, said to his fellow brother Abdul Rahman, "I am the richest man amongst the helpers. I am glad to share my property, half and half, with you. I have 2 wives. I am ready to divorce one, and after the expiry of her iddah, the prescribed period for a woman divorcee to stay within her house unmarried. You may marry her," but Abdurrahman bin was not prepared to accept anything, neither property nor home. So he blessed his brother and said kindly, "Direct me to the market so that I may make my fortune with my own hands." And he did prosper and got married very shortly by his own labor. The helpers were extremely generous to their brethren. In faith, Abu Huraira reported that they once approached the Prophet with the request that their orchards of palm trees should be distributed equally between the Muslims of Medina and their brethren from Mecca. But the Prophet was reluctant to put this heavy burden upon them. It was, however, decided that the immigrants would work in the orchards along with the helpers, and the yield would be divided equally amongst them. Such examples point directly to the spirit of sacrifice and altruism and cordiality on the part of the helpers, and also to the feeling of appreciation and gratitude and self-respect that the immigrants held dear to their hearts. They took only what helped them a reasonable living. In short, this policy of mutual brotherhood was so wise and timely that many obstinate problems were resolved wonderfully and reasonably. A charter of Islamic alliance, just as the Prophet had established a code of brotherhood amongst the believers, so too he was keen on establishing friendly relations between the Muslims and non-Muslim tribes of Arabia. He established a sort of treaty aiming at ruling out all pre-Islamic rancor and inter-tribal feuds. He was so meticulous not to leave any area in the charter that would allow pre-Islamic traditions to sneak in or violate the new environment. He wanted to establish herein, we look over some of its provisions. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. This is a document from Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, concerning immigrants and helpers and those who followed and strove with them. They are one nation to exclusion of other people.